Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a seriously fascinating piece of source material, a wide-ranging, deep-dive conversation between Joe Rogan and actor Scott Eastwood. Now, look, I know it would be super easy to just dismiss this as, another celebrity chat promoting a movie, but if we actually look closely at the ideas they're exploring here, it's basically a masterclass in how curiosity and discipline connect seemingly opposite worlds. We're talking about the gym, the absolute depths of the ocean, the pressures of modern media, and even the heavy weight of global history. It really reveals how adopting a disciplined mindset can completely transform the way you interact with the world around you. All right, let's dive right in. Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. First, we'll look at consistency in health and work. 2, reality versus the shark myth. 3, Hollywood craft and human psychology. And 4, history and modern critical thinking. Kicking things off with Section 1, consistency in health and work, building the foundation. Look, the simple truth is, any grand adventure or deeply demanding career, whether you're acting, directing, or honestly, whatever high-pressure field you happen to be in, it requires a rock-solid physical baseline. When our source material digs into health, it is definitely not just about looking good for a camera. It's about treating your body like a long-term investment. I mean, we are talking about profound, systemic benefits here. Strengthening your heart, building your muscles, while at the very same time sharpening your mental clarity and getting way deeper sleep. Movement is, essentially, one of humanity's absolute best medicines. And what's really fascinating is how someone like Eastwood actually manages this. Acting requires these brutal schedules, right? Flying across the globe, chaotic 14-hour days. So to maintain this foundation efficiently, the source notes he actually uses prepackaged supplement systems. He completely removes the friction. He doesn't want to waste mental energy opening 20 different bottles at 5 a.m. He just systemizes it. He makes hitting that baseline incredibly easy to achieve. And, that brings us to a super crucial concept. Sustainable daily routines will easily beat complicated health fads every single time. How often do we see people getting just completely bogged down in the tiny minutia of health? They're agonizing over exactly which low-carb diet to follow, or they're debating the precise formulation of a certain protein powder, or trying to perfectly time a really complex fasting window. The source material highlights a critical shift in perspective here. Instead of obsessing over every tiny, complicated detail that you are probably going to abandon in a month anyway, you have to focus on the bigger picture, which is perfectly summed up by this shared philosophy. Consistency matters more than perfection. This is the absolute core takeaway for your physical health. Think about it. A routine that's just good enough, but you actually do it every single day for 10 years, that is going to yield massively better results than some flawless, scientifically optimal routine that you only manage to stick with for 3 weeks. Long-term health is built on those quiet, repeated daily actions. It's all about the discipline of just showing up rather than chasing the illusion of flawless execution. Moving right along to Section 2, reality versus the shark myth, respecting the unknown. So having that physical discipline kind of gears you up for exploring really unforgiving environments, right? Like the ocean. Which brings us to Eastwood's time diving with sharks. When most of us think of sharks, our minds almost immediately jump to that classic Hollywood myth of Jaws. These mindless, hyper-aggressive human hunters just lurking in the waves waiting for us to dip a toe in. But the ecological reality discussed in our source is just completely different. Sharks are not these movie monsters. They are highly intelligent, deeply curious animals. And humans, we are generally not their preferred prey at all. Actually, most encounters are simply cases of mistaken identity. If you think about it from the perspective of a shark looking up from the deep water, the silhouette of a human paddling on a surfboard looks almost exactly like a seal. Get this. Consider the number 1. That represents the typical number of bites in a great white encounter. Just 1. And why just one single bite? Because the shark is basically taking an exploratory bite. It quickly realizes you definitely aren't the high-fat seal it was hoping for, and it just swims away. When you actually look at the hard statistics, our fear just doesn't match the reality. You are literally far more likely to be killed by a lightning strike or in a completely mundane, everyday car accident than by a shark. Understanding the actual biology just totally strips away that irrational fear. Now, having said all that, not all sharks are exactly the same. We do have to pivot to the bull shark. This aggressive species has this incredible biological adaptation. It can actually survive in both saltwater and shallow freshwater rivers. This means it can travel surprisingly far upriver, which brings it into direct proximity with human habitats, right where people are swimming. Combine that biological quirk with a notoriously aggressive and totally unpredictable temperament, and you start to understand why they are treated with extreme caution. So it's not about blind panic, it's about having a disciplined, factual knowledge of your environment. Because here's the big picture. If we let that irrational fear dictate our actions and we just start removing apex predators like sharks from the ocean, it triggers a completely devastating chain reaction. Let's walk through it. First, the apex predators are gone. Second, the prey populations surge completely unchecked because nothing is hunting them. Third, those surging populations overconsume their own resources, causing crucial food chains to just totally collapse. And fourth, that ultimately leads to a massive sweeping decline in overall marine biodiversity. So understanding nature in this structured scientific way, it leads to a profound respect for the environment, rather than just a Hollywood-fueled panic. All right, let's shift our focus back to dry land. Section 3, Hollywood Craft, the art of directing and risk. Making a movie is essentially a giant exercise in managing human psychology and creativity, usually under immense pressure. And as our source material really highlights, there is no single rigid path to creative success. There is a really stark contrast in directing styles out there. On one hand, you have the planners, guys like Oliver Stone, who rely on insanely detailed storyboards and demand absolute total precision for every single frame. But on the exact opposite side, you have the spontaneous directors, like Guy Ritchie, who completely thrive on improvisation and spontaneous experimentation right there on the set. And the crazy thing? Both styles produce absolutely incredible films. It just proves that discipline in art doesn't always mean rigid, unchanging structure. Sometimes, discipline means having the confidence to just let a scene evolve naturally. And of course, you really can't talk about Scott Eastwood without talking about his legendary father, Clint Eastwood. Scott absorbed some pretty non-negotiable lessons from his dad's directing style. Things like prioritizing extreme professionalism, always showing up fully prepared, executing with maximum efficiency, and giving actors the actual room to perform naturally. You have to know the story you want to tell, communicate it without all the unnecessary complexity, and just get it done. It proves that whether you are in the gym, lifting weights, or standing on a multi-million-dollar film set, it's consistency, reliability, and efficiency that actually guarantee long-term success. So the really crucial point here is that understanding human behavior isn't just a tool for making movies. It's a tool for understanding the world itself. The source material actually takes this fascinating detour into true crime, specifically breaking down the psychology behind major events like the infamous Lee Murray bank robbery, and it reveals how extreme risk-taking and astonishingly poor judgment can coexist even in highly intelligent people. I mean, why do people orchestrate these incredibly complex, brilliant plans only to turn around and make a destructive, high-risk decision that ruins their entire lives? It's such a deep dive into the unpredictable variables of the human mind, and it shows the devastating consequences of what happens when discipline is applied to the completely wrong goals. Which perfectly sets up our fourth and final section, history and modern critical thinking. Examining the past and present. So taking that psychology of human behavior, how we handle pressure, how we handle risk and discipline, and applying it to the broadest scale possible, that brings us to global conflicts. The source material spends a pretty significant chunk of time reflecting on World War II and the Greatest Generation. Just imagine tracing this timeline for a second. Imagine being an ordinary person during this era. In the 1930s, you survive widespread, literally crushing economic hardship during the Great Depression. Then, almost immediately, from 1941 to 1945, you are plunged into an unimaginable global conflict that requires the ultimate personal sacrifice. You have these barely adult soldiers facing down the fate of the free world. And then, post-1945, you return home to decades of silently carried psychological trauma. Establishing this sheer scale really helps us realize the immense, crushing pressures that were placed on ordinary human beings back then. And that builds into the much darker, often ignored realities of that war. We have to remember, at the time, mental health was incredibly poorly understood. What we now know as PTSD was largely just ignored entirely, which led to the silent suffering of millions of veterans who were basically just told to carry on. Furthermore, those extreme conditions push governments to their absolute psychological and ethical limits. The source notes the issuance of military stimulants to soldiers across several different armed forces, simply to keep them awake during prolonged, grueling combat operations. It perfectly illustrates what happens when human limits are stretched way beyond the breaking point. So why do we study this stuff? Because history teaches us a massive lesson, the profound danger of accepting unexamined narratives. Studying the past, isn't just about memorizing random dates for a test. It is a critical tool for explaining our current society. The extreme pressures of the past show us exactly how easily information can be shaped, how deep suffering can be hidden, and why we must always look deeper than just the surface story. Which brings us right into the modern day, and this highly practical framework extracted directly from our source material, modern media literacy. In an age of just constant, overwhelming information, you need discipline. Step 1, refuse to accept a single source uncritically. Step 2, actively compare multiple perspectives. Step 3, carefully examine the available evidence yourself. And step 4, which is perhaps the most important one of all, remain completely open to updating your views as new facts emerge. Complex events always involve uncertainty, guys. We have to be willing to change our minds when new, verifiable information actually becomes available. So I've really got to ask you directly, are you uncritically accepting your very first source of news? When you are scrolling through your feed in the morning, do you just read a headline and instantly absorb it as total truth? Or do you actually apply the critical, disciplined thinking we just outlined? Look, it is incredibly easy to fall into the trap of passive consumption, but true understanding, that requires active, curious engagement. Man, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, distilling the core essence of this source material, from building a consistent, sustainable physical foundation in the gym, to respecting the actual biological reality of apex predators out in the ocean, from the intense professionalism required on Hollywood film sets, all the way to the harsh historical realities of World War II, and finally, to the absolute necessity of disciplined critical thinking in our modern media landscape. It really all comes back to a single unifying philosophy. So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. How can you apply this philosophy of curiosity and discipline to your own life today? Stay curious, stay disciplined, and always keep questioning. I'll see you on the next explainer.